There was once a book, The Denial of Death. It won a Pulitzer Prize by Ernest Becker, and he wrote other interesting books too, but this was a kingpin book for him. Maybe came out in 1960s, 1970s. In it, he discussed how he believes various people throughout history have denied death, and that this has caused more conflict and more problems than you can imagine. This was then picked up by people like Sheldon Solomon in Canada, who expanded upon the ideas somewhat. And I have a question here. In listening to various videos, discussions by Sheldon Solomon, he claims that the idea of death is so abhorrent that we created various things in cultures, including religions, often, or components of religions, to deal with this horrifying thing of being the only animal on planet Earth to know we will one day die. And his claiming then we have various apparatuses in society to block this out, otherwise we could hardly live day to day. And that this promotes more anxiety on an unconscious or more level than you can possibly imagine. But if that were so, why is the typical person in a, quote, nursing home at 100 years of age or other probably quite ready to, quote, depart for greener pastures, however you might interpret that? Why are they also more likely than not to say, I had a good life? Hopefully saying that. And why do people who die, say, in their 50s have a lot of regrets, contrary-wise? What is the concept of acceptance all about in general? Of anything, any kind of loss, including life itself. Now, of course, the aspect of pain after life being a completely different aspect to talk of. So when Sheldon Solomon repeatedly talks of the denial of death, he's talking, I believe, only of the component of loss of pleasures by living. He's not talking about denying death because we don't maybe know what could happen after death. Now that being addressed more by Kelvin Chin, C-H-I-N, a lawyer who started a group called the Freedom from Fear of Death Foundation, and in it he talks of this component of fear of punishment or pain after death as a major factor in the fear of death itself. He doesn't just say we fear the discontinuation of our life going on and on and on, like Ernest Becker did or Sheldon Solomon. So just how much of a fear is it that we will one day die if you take out the component of possible punishment? Punishment basically in the Christian doctrine of hellfire damnation. Although I would say, reading 5 years ago, I ran into the concept that the Chinese version of hell, as once might have existed, say, was worse than the Christian view of hell, or punishment after death. Now, why would this even be something that would pop up as a Nobel Prize-winning book to discuss denial of death and our dislike of death and our awareness that we are going to die in general? Just how big of a problem is this? Well, Napoleon Hill, in one of his books, How to Own Your Own Mind, talked of one of the biggest problems being our wishful thinking and our capacity to deceive ourselves with this wishful thinking, what we might come up with. Well, it seems to me, on the one hand, Ernest Becker might be saying it's wishful thinking, or painful thinking too, or a combo, to want to live forever. And yet, here's a slight component, I think, not discussed. What if wishful thinking and, quote, indulging in it is rather like indulging in chemically based drugs, whether it's alcohol, use of cigarettes, too much cigarettes, I might add, as opposed to a few, and facetiously, how many cigars per se did George Burns smoke? A few a day or a box a day? I don't know. But if we're talking indulging either in wishful thinking or escapisms from chemically based substances, or even activities to distract us, if we're talking that these can be indulged in too much, well then can't the wishful thinking of thinking we will live forever be not only indulged in by some too much, but the penchant to do so all the more difficult to resist if it is marketed to us and all the time and in front of our own eyes all the time also. Hence, cigarettes being all the more addictive when there were always billboard signs and ads in magazines until taken away or largely taken away. Likewise, there are limits on what is advertised as per porn for consumption. You're going to have to look other than the typical TV screen from network broadcasting to see ads for porn. And as for alcohol, there are counties in my state of Kentucky that are dry counties. They don't want alcohol sold. And I lived in one of those counties in Appalachia 15 years ago. Interestingly, everyone in that dry county, if wanting alcohol, would go across the county line, and about 10 feet over the county line was a big shop where you could get all the alcohol, beer, whatever you wanted. But it took a little extra effort. Likewise, too, as per prostitution, there is a city, I think Tucson, Arizona, where one of the most common, yes, the most common arrest, resulting in fines between $50 and about $300, is for solicitation of prostitution. Why would there be laws against this and enforcement of it if it weren't deemed something to keep under control to an extent anyway? Same for porn. And same in Kentucky, amongst other places, more so than most, for alcohol sales. Pluses and minuses, of course. If you don't have alcohol to blow off steam, at least, hence the phrase, I need a stiff drink, what is replacing it? Is it marijuana? Is it something else? Food? On and on and on. Is it isolating? So that's not necessarily a catch-all solution in my mind. But at any rate, the concept of regulating this, not marketing it too heavily, if at all, and yes, to children too. Otherwise, why would there even be age restrictions on certain content and advertising, or as to the hours it is put on certain media? Now, half a year ago in Kentucky, one of the leading newspapers had a front page spread in Sunday edition on lottery machines, multiplying like crazy here in this state. But Chris Hedges, a minister of the Christian tradition who has an MDiv from Harvard, also spoke of this. And he does not live in Kentucky, this same phenomenon he brought up. And so it is said that in Kentucky these machines are illegal, and yet at the same time loopholes have been found to use them. And once when I was camping in Appalachia half a year ago, I went to a laundry in a small town of 15,000 or less. And in the laundry, half the machines were broken, but the owner told me, look in the back. And I did, and there was state-of-the-art equipment of lottery machines. And he said the machines for laundry pay nothing, but the machines in back pay $1,000 a week profit to him. And that there are 400 of such in that town of 15,000 alone. I also observe comments that one of the best businesses to run is food, restaurants, and fast food also. And in the Mexican parts of a major area here in Kentucky, you will see all these little cantinas, for lack of a better word, all these little trailers offering burritos and such. Now, back 100 years ago, these might have been labeled vices, and there were, of course, temperance movements and attempts to stop people from drinking by law completely, hence the word teetotalers, etc. But left out is teetotaling in one direction, but indulging in something else in another direction. So my question and point is this. Ernest Becker said we have a built-in hatred about facing death, and knowing that we're going to die creates us much anxiety, and that we have wishful thinking with religions and various things in our culture in general to deny death. But what if this is a whole lot like these vices we're talking about? Cigarettes, supposedly, porn, prostitution, alcohol, what have you. Lottery machines also. What if we can market denial of death all too much, such that it has exacerbated our fear of dying, of knowing we're going to die and end? And that you can market various schemes, so to speak, to beat death until we're constantly thinking about it way too much and have way too much anxiety. And not just that, but marketing also the concept of punishment after death, which Ernest Becker and Sheldon Solomon have totally left out of the equation, I might add. Hence, one audio I heard mentioning what is the best way to get people in church? Offer them a chicken dinner and a strong message about hell. Well, the third part left out a message, of course, how to live forever. But do you get my drift then? I find it very curious and interesting that, yes, we can have a fear of death, of ending, and anxiety knowing we will. The only animals who know this on a conscious level. But we also have other things built into us too, to escape anxieties in general. Call them drugs, call them vices, what have you. But we as a society clamp down on these vices. But have we clamped down on marketing both the concept of beating death and punishment after death as per hellfire damnation? Maybe, here's a concept, maybe the denial of death, of beating death through religious means is marketed so often, or permitted to be marketed, because it has strong utilitarian functions in a society, certain ones more than others. Maybe by denying death, we are also saying that we don't have to enjoy ourselves much now because we can get a big vacation package afterward. And thus, few funds, few efforts in general have to be put into improving the lives of certain people right now, which might cost more resources to some, and they're not wanting to spend such resources. Hence, if marketing, all too frequently in fact, of how to beat death through religious means and concepts, if that's marketed a lot of other things don't have to be addressed. And I've seen this sadly play out all too often. Along with the phrase, "we will pray for you," which doesn't solve any problems really. So yes, Ernest Becker talked about our inbuilt fear of death, yes. But isn't a lot of that due to even certain words we use that catastrophize death, such as murder, or a widowmaker heart attack, or a sudden ending? Various words can stir up death as a catastrophe, not to mention the word hell, hellfire damnation, used, by the way, less and less, I believe, and driving more and more people away from Christianity into things like Buddhism or mindfulness meditation or, quote, materialism or intellectualism, what have you, or simply distractions galore. Or you might call the capitalistic or American way, as opposed to the how to beat death and not get burned after death way. So to recap, Ernest Becker and Sheldon Solomon and others, a few others, have talked of anxiety about death, but they didn't talk at all about punishment after death as a component part of some religions, especially. And the words that exist, like hell and hellfire damnation and punishment, and even choice and paying consequences for, quote, bad choices. Even the word thus, or the concept of free will, being marketed in and of itself much more in religions, certain ones, than in other spheres of life. And so not only is the marketing, you might say, of certain religions of how to beat death and beat punishment after death, but also the marketing of free will and why you should even deserve supposedly punishment after death in the first place. It's a whole package deal here. So Sheldon Solomon again and Ernest Becker talked about our fear of death. But we also have fears of pain while alive, including the pains of losses, the pains of losses of liberties, if you will, also, as per such. That's a big problem and stirs up many people's ire. Hence, a comedian, I'm trying to remember, J.P. Sears, S-E-A-R-S, makes his bread and butter talking across the country in various venues about our, quote, rights being taken away. And Napoleon Hill talks of this too, a very kingpin point of his in his book, How to Own Your Own Mind. So not only do we have fears about dying, yes, of loss of the pleasures of living, and tangentially possibly punishment after death, but we have fears that we compensate for by these things we call vices, distractions, what have you, dulling agents also, about other fears too. And these, to the extent that we have escapes that are marketed more and more, are fears that we don't address, confront, and try to resolve, to include partial or full resolution by refining our words themselves with their misconceptions built in. So, to recap for the nth time, yes, we have fears, including the fear of death. But does that mean that this is a strongly inbuilt genetic thing, simply because we have awareness that other animals don't have? because of the complexity of our brains and our social structures? Or is there more to it? Are these fears exacerbated by, quote, marketing and solutions to them that aren't in our best interest completely, as well as certain words that have misconceptions built into them that also are part of the marketing package? For that's why we regulate things like heroin usage, marijuana usage to an extent, Vice on TV, if you wanted to use that word in terms of porn. We regulate this especially to children, lest escapes be utilized all more often. Case in point, in the Philippines in the past, 10 years ago, Duarte had such a conniption fit about drug addicts in that country that he gave carte blanche permission to police to shoot drug addicts on sight. It had gotten to that point, he alleged, and that was his solution. That was what happened when drugs became used too much without regulation. Maybe we need to examine whether the promoting through marketing of ways to beat death and punishment after death as a concept even, and choice versus determinism as part of the religious package too, is a form of marketing that needs to be considered and examined. Thoughts to consider here.